Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we are joined with Red Hat and Intel for a webinar on staying resilient, how financial institutions are leveraging automation to innovate and compete. My name is Zenon Capron, and thank you all for taking the time today to join us. I think this topic is very interesting and very apt, especially with everything that we've experienced over the past year. We have a great panel lined up for today's discussion. From the Asian Development Bank, we have Krista Lazada, who is the Senior IT Specialist for Innovation and Engineering, Benjamin Henschel from Red Hat, and Christopher Tan from Intel. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar will be about 60 minutes to get through all the topics that we're looking at today. We will open it up for a Q&A, so we'll insert your questions as you have them. So please use the Q&A function within Zoom if you have any questions for the audience, and we'll be happy to share those and answer as many as we can. We do have quite a full house today, so if we don't get to your questions, we will respond after the webinar with answers to any particular questions you have. We will also be recording this webinar, although all of you are on mute, so you will be able to reference the webinar later on if you want to look back and listen in on some of the things that were discussed during this webinar. So with the housekeeping out of the way, I'm going to pass it over to Joe Jelinek, who's our Research Director for Capron Asia here in Singapore. Joe.
Thank you very much, Zenon, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today. So with a lot of pressure these days on financial institutions, with competition, with increased regulatory oversight and the need for tighter compliance, with the increasing cybersecurity risks, customer expectations, the need to lower costs, financial institutions have been working with ever more complex IT infrastructures. And that includes working with cloud, hybrid cloud, mixed cloud environments, containers, virtualization. So the need for automation has never been more pronounced as it is today. And that is only going to get more severe as time goes on. So I'd like to be able to now jump straight into the discussion by starting with our panel that we have today, by asking really setting the tone, the case for automation. So maybe Ben, you'd like to start. What do you think are the prerequisites for moving, for companies who want to move to a hybrid cloud environment, cloud architecture, from an not just an agile perspective, but also from a resiliency and adaptability perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, it's a good question to start with, I think, just to set the context here, particularly as we're talking about resiliency and adaptability in the financial services sector. And I'd just also like to call out with Krista coming from the Asian Development Bank, really appreciate her time and willingness to participate and give some real life context to this, and our support with Intel on this. Yeah, so to come to your question, the thing that's been, I think, most profound from at least Red Hat's point of view, and our, I would say, really 20-year plus relationship that we've had with financial services, is the need for continuous improvement in the way automation as a competency is enveloped and engendered within the banks or financial institutions' IT operations. And now the more strategic division is the DevOps or innovative engineering divisions. And it's very safe to say that if you think about the nature of IT architectures, both at the application level, the data level, and the infrastructure, the storage, memory, compute, logging, identity management, those security tools, all those sorts of things, it is more complicated, not less. And the public cloud providers, as wonderful as they are, have a plethora of services that can be, consumed. And I think Krista will certainly talk about this. Trying to integrate these different things together in a resilient and compliant and secure way is very difficult. And not only, with the DevOps movement of trying to implement faster code release of application code, we've now got that at the infrastructure level. And that's where updates are happening all the time as infrastructure as code, as many of our audience would have heard or already doing. That requires a high degree of automation. To manually do that is very costly, prone to error, open to vulnerabilities, and then just doesn't provide a level of efficiency that's needed. And I'll just sort of close off with this, Joe. The notion of technical debt cannot be underestimated. And when you consume or use, very innovative, but what I would regard as bespoke technologies, which are wonderful by themselves, but they don't operate in a silo. And at an infrastructure level, that is more true today than it's ever been. And I think that's where automation and orchestration of the infrastructure bits is needed, just as you do with application code. It's integrated and it's automated. So that's really become a prerequisite for being able to facilitate, the on-premise and then the hybrid or public cloud, multi-cloud model. Automation is a non-negotiable.
Thank you very much, Ben. Yes, that's very interesting. And Christian, maybe we could bring you in here now to talk about, from your practical experience, what Ben has been saying about the need for orchestrating and automation at the infrastructure level.
Okay, thanks, Joe. So basically for us, I think we have to start fundamentally on the thinking of how is infrastructure traditionally being managed. And before automation, that means that I would have to file a ticket and somebody on the other end would have to process that, probably talking to other teams as well, right? So network, storage, the OS team, and so on and so forth. Now, traditionally, if the VMs were to live forever or for a very long time, and we don't manage a lot of infrastructure, that's probably okay. That model is okay. But now, as we move more and more, and ADB has started into their cloud journey, as we move more and more to the cloud, it means different, right? Because that means that we would have to spin up more VMs, and that means somebody would have to process thousands of tickets, probably at the end of the day. There's also a cost benefit or cost impact to this, because suddenly we're not paying for a VM that sits on our data center. We're paying by the hour that we're using it. So imagine somebody spinning up those infrastructure that's needed and then killing them at evening when it's not being used. So it's definitely a model that cannot scale, especially since we move into the hybrid cloud or the public cloud or even multi-cloud world. So for us, we really needed to change the way that we handle infrastructure, and that's by introducing tools or platforms called infrastructure as code.
Fantastic. And Krista, maybe if we could just stay with you, because you've sort of started to touch upon this. But in terms of, as organizations move towards hybrid and multi-cloud architectures, what do you feel, and from the Asian Development Bank's perspective, what have been some of the key pain points that you've faced in doing that?
So I guess something that's close to my heart is we wanted a consistent environment or a consistent infrastructure, consistent behavior across different environments. And that's very hard in a point and click world, right? Because that means that there's some knowledge that exists within somebody's brain that could have been forgotten or not passed to a team. So there's certainly some things like lack of transparency on the documentation. You cannot guarantee consistency across dev, test, UAT, production, because it's dependent on a human factor, which would make mistakes. So what we wanted to make sure is, even though we probably don't have those, we're not traditional banks, so we don't have those voluminous transactions. What we wanted to make sure is we can easily guarantee certain, zero error rates, very consistent, and even making sure that our services are probably available. So we focus on the three things: probably efficiency, resiliency, and security. So we can only do that through automation, because somebody else is doing something. Like, we're following a certain desired state for all of our environments, and we're making sure that this specific infrastructure defined as code is being run across all environments with no human factor, with nothing dependent on a human except approving the process to make sure that, hey, I need to spin this up in production.
Fantastic. And Chris, maybe we can bring you in now as well. Having spoken to some of your customers, what pain points have you heard from them? What are you hearing on the ground there from your customers in terms of when they're moving across to these architectures on the cloud? Sorry, Chris, you're on mute, I think.
Yeah, sorry. So from our conversations with our customers, is mostly, I guess, in the infrastructure space, right? And we talk about as they move into the cloud, there are considerations on the physical infrastructure, whether they're in hybrid or whether they want to go into fully into the public cloud. But what's important is for customers to understand that there is an infrastructure underneath all of the applications that they run. Selecting the right infrastructure, and you have to look at, from manageability, from scalability, from security, right? Each of the public cloud providers have slightly different nuance to all those factors, right? And to make sure that those are discussed upfront, and not as something that is brought in much later, because once you have decided the way you want to go, and then you find that the infrastructure doesn't fit what you want to deliver. So those kind of things are important, right? And whether you're looking at from a manageability point of view or scalability point of view, those factors have to be considered. One of the things that is important is also that the Intel works very heavily with our ecosystem, right? Here with Red Hat as well, and ensuring that a lot of the infrastructure that you have is certified to a certain extent, validated, tested, that works with well, gives customers also that peace of mind, right? So those are kind of areas that Intel comes in, gives you that assurance that we have a wide ecosystem of enablement. You have a wide choice in terms of if you are going to procure infrastructure on your own, huge amount of choice from an OEM perspective, but also we work closely with all the public cloud providers, right? Today, 80-90% of the infrastructure in all the public cloud service providers are Intel based, right? And that will give you some assurance that we work with them from infrastructure point of view, but also with the application providers, the OS providers, and so on.
Fantastic. And Chris, that you make some very good points, and I think we'll definitely come back to the physical infrastructure side of things in a moment. But before we do, Ben, maybe I can bring you back into the conversation and ask. So we've talked about some of the pain points for migrating across and working on the hybrid cloud environment. How can DevOps sort of agile processes such as CI/CD be applied at the infrastructure level to help address some of these challenges?
Sure, Joe, and I think I'll also get Krista to sort of put some real life context to this, but the thesis that Red Hat takes on this, and this is one of the reasons why Red Hat acquired Ansible back in 2015, is when you take in totality the DevOps philosophy and movement, and all the work that Jez Humble and Jin Kim, and then the predecessors Martin Fowler and those guys, put together around that model of how do you get code into production fast, reliably, with a lower lead time, with a lower change failure rate, using the DORA sort of 4 key metrics that are now well known in the DevOps movement, and now sort of more to the DevSecOps movement. When you apply that at the application level, that's all great. But as it's becoming incredibly apparent, applications and data systems need an agile infrastructure to scale with it. And to what Krista was talking about, having a standardized operating environment so that you can get consistency, reusability, standardization, and compliance, and then have an audit trail of what changes you've made to that infrastructure level. And we can also, there's a very, very public case, several weeks ago, or 2 months ago, really, that came out globally that impacted, government departments with an infrastructure update, that the need for compliance and auditability and automation at that below the line, that infrastructure layer, while you've got that at the application layer, you need it at the infrastructure layer as well, because infrastructure as code is moving so fast and having so many updates that it, 10 years ago, it didn't happen. From an operating system like, say, Red Hat Enterprise Linux or HPOX, you get an update every 6 months. Now, a systems engineer operations team could handle that and plan for that and get a weekend outage. Now you have updates with containerization and container platforms and all the bits and pieces that make a container platform work together. They're getting updated every week. Kubernetes is doing it on a quarterly basis. Red Hat's doing that with OpenShift on a quarterly basis. And there's a whole lot of interdependencies needed for that. Now you deploy that on premise and in the public cloud and try and get applications working together. If you don't have automation in there, applying a DevOps model of CI/CD for infrastructure as code, then things become very, very tricky to be able to manage that standard, secure, reliable, compliant platform. And that's where the need for DevOps below the line at that infrastructure layer, and where automation is a critical non-negotiable competency of orchestrating and deploying those updates and certifying, and they're patched and it works together, and being able to roll back if it fails is just as necessary as it was at the application layer. So that's where that principle, is a non-negotiable and a practice that we see automation and tools like, say, Red Hat Ansible is a really foundational component to help, enable that level of automation and compliance and scale.
Fantastic, Ben. And Krista, yes, would you like to be able to bring in some of your anecdotal ideas and examples and insights of how you've been applying the sort of agile DevOps practices on the infrastructure level?
Yeah, I mean, it's how do I say this? It's interesting because we've actually started the automation project last year on April, and ADB closed its headquarters last March. Last year as well. So we're probably the first project that had to run in this situation where everything is, during this pandemic, everything is remote, right? And, being infrastructure, we're not really used to agile methodologies or DevOps. It's been matured or probably perfected in the application side, as Ben said. It's usually, mostly on application development that uses this DevOps principles. But when you think about infrastructure or data, for example, you don't really think DevOps is a clear answer to that problem. So our team had to adapt, following agile practices. We've prioritized the backlogs, given autonomy to the team actually to choose their own cards and make sure that the cadence of the project would run as desired. And how we did it was we finished the automation project, which was spinning up Ansible Tower, within 6 weeks. And we followed certain principles, such as Git being the version of truth, that we would, as much as possible, reuse modules, and we would not write code that is probably doing the same thing but differ in slight different ways. So we followed certain principles that we've established before we started the project, and applied that in spinning up this platform. I think one of my favorites is that we've actually written Ansible Tower using infrastructure as code as well. So it's kind of like Inception kind of mechanism, wherein it's infrastructure as code platform written with infrastructure as code run by a DevOps pipeline, so that we would have our orchestrator in place. So basically, I think the importance of why we've used DevOps is, as Ben said, automation is very powerful, right? So you can write it and probably abuse it in such a way which will not work with financial industries like ADB, because we need to make sure that we are following certain compliance and we are secure and so on and so forth. And that's where DevOps kicks in, right? Because you can shift left. And that's the whole principle of DevOps. You want to shift left as early as possible, meaning to catch the errors or the gates, like security issues, as early as possible, even before pushing it to a different environment. So even at build time, if I can find the errors, if I can find certain issues, I could fix it faster. So that was probably the main goal why we said, okay, we wanted to make sure that whatever we have on dev is something that we can push to prod with full confidence, that we are sure that this is prod ready at any point in time, because we've followed all the gates. And it breaks certain traditions as well, right? So we're hoping that in the future, we could use this for change management and say that, hey, you know what? We followed this pipeline, everything passed. Can you please allow us to push this into production? And really pushing to production, meaning somebody clicking the button to approve, and then everything is going to be there. Because everything is automated, we're sure that what we have in development is equal to what we have in test, in UAT, and production, and all other environments that we want to do it to.
Fantastic. And Ben, I saw you nodding there. A lot of this must ring quite true for you. Would you like to, do you have anything you'd like to add to Krista's points?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really, 100% agree with what Chris is saying, particularly about this, shift to the left, that it's moving it further upstream before it gets to the next stage of the sort of maturity of the code, whether it's sort of the application level, which is, where, DevOps really sort of came from, but now that's being applied to the infrastructure layer of being able to apply a patch, do a CDE update to the system, do a rebuild, go through your UAT testing or automated testing scenarios, check that all the green lights are coming up, it's compliant, and then push that environment to the next stage, whether it's SRT or pre-production or production. And we're just talking about at the infrastructure level, just to get a platform out there in an automated way, and then have a level of compliance and audit control so you can see what's been done, who did what to those systems. But because you have built, in Krista's case, an Ansible playbook, which is orchestrating different infrastructure components to be configured, deployed, integrated, and then tested, and then you've got a record of review on that, and you're then rinse and repeating that. That is incredibly powerful, because it reduces change failure rates, it improves uptime, it reduces downtime, it catches errors earlier when you're making those changes. And Krista, and her team can spend a whole lot more time further refining and enhancing the automation across the spectrum of, from a systems engineer's workstation through to the production systems and all the pieces in between, and do that value-added task rather than doing manual configuration and manual triage of those things. And I think that's the thing that's just so super powerful about that principle and practice, and then having a tool that can orchestrate and then build, in a human readable way, these playbooks, if you will, that orchestrate and then have a record of change on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'd like to now move to the next section of the webinar. And Chris, I'd like to bring you back in to the conversation and dig a bit down into the actual physical infrastructure side of things. Regardless of the type of IT architecture that FIs are deploying, how does the underlying physical infrastructure support agility, scalability, and security?
Yeah, so a lot of that work is what we do with our partners out there, right? Like, in the amount of heavy work that we do with Red Hat, as we develop the platforms over the years, we look at how the developing technologies from an OS perspective, but also the infrastructure software, right? Which is what we're talking here, and really things like Ansible, things like OpenShift. How is that delivering the value that customers want to see? And then how do we translate those capabilities from an infrastructure point of view? I mean, the onset of cloud, really changed that landscape tremendously, right? In the sense that people call whatever you want to call it, whether you want to call it scalability or want to call it elasticity, those kind of capabilities was what we tried to build as much on the platform as possible, right? And you see that is the way that Intel has developed the service. It's no longer just about raw performance, right? It's not about the speeds and feeds. It's also about putting new features on the platform and the CPU that allows you to boost your performance, your security. For example, all the crypto capabilities that we put on the CPU, right? Just maybe less than 10 years ago, right, or maybe 5 or 6 years ago, saying encrypting every data flow, kind of sends alarm bells to the infrastructure manager, right? Because there's huge amount of compute on the software side as well you need to do, and that his performance tremendously. But now, encrypting everything is like a no-brainer, right? Everybody does that, right, for security. But that is because of some of the crypto engines that we have built on the hardware itself, which then offloads that load on the OS or any applications that need to run it in the software level, right? So what we're trying to do is to try and put a lot of these acceleration features, crypto features, natively on the CPU itself. And as we put on generations, as people talk about AI, machine learning, and so on, again, most of some of that capabilities we're trying to build on the CPU, so that you again get that hardware native acceleration for all these kind of capabilities without taxing the OS or the application, right? So that's how we will build. That's on the security side, performance side, and then now we're talking also about making telemetry on the servers more accessible beyond the OS, right? And that's where things like Ansible, you're not only looking at the infrastructure software as a state, you'll be able to access the physical infrastructure states as well, right? And then you're talking about being able to really have a visibility of how your hardware is performing. And how do you then throttle it, or how do you then load balance based on real data that is coming from infrastructure. But to be able to do that, you will definitely then need to, as I said, have some kind of homogeneous environment in infrastructure to be able to see that. But also, as I said, exposing all these kind of capabilities also requires that huge amount of enablement work that we work with our partners. Again, I don't think anybody in this industry does as much of that as Intel does, right? And there's always this joke that we throw around that for a company that doesn't sell software, Intel actually has I guess that we have the number 2 or number 3 amount of software engineers working for us, right? Behind people like Microsoft, and most people don't even know that. We don't sell software, but we have a huge amount of software engineers, right? And that is really, we make sure that we engage, all our software partners, but also the cloud partners, the infrastructures, OEMs, and so on. As well as we also have got engagements with the end customers as well, right? So that we get some feedback from customers as to what they're looking at, what are the things that they want to see, what are the things they're trying to do out there, and then we try and engineer that into the infrastructure as well.
Chris, yes, and you made some interesting points there, Chris, and you talked about security, obviously, and I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper into that, if you don't mind. How would you say Intel is helping their customers with their security, the high level sort of security applications, such as the use of AI or machine learning? How are the CPU and the features on those enabling enabling those applications to run smoothly, whilst at the same time maintaining performance and customer experience?
Yeah, so I'll go back to that point about making sure that we continually develop features that the application providers want to provide the services that they want to provide to their end customers, right? And therefore, what kind of features that they will need. And so, DL Boost is, for example, that we have a feature that we call DL Boost, which is a whole bag full of deep learning features that we built on the CPU, right? And this again is we provide the features, but we also provide the development tools for software developers to build on, to use those features, right? Again, depending on the how deep you go into your development work, right? Whether you're just building services at the application level, but then again, we also have got developers today that want to tap on some of the physical features for the AI boost and the AI performance, right? So those are the kind. So we provide development tools. We provide a lot of the partners that work on our platform for specific use cases, and that's how we build on the ecosystem. Right? It's a very broad and wide ecosystem. It depends on what you want to achieve out there.
Yes, and just one other question, going back to the cloud environment, thinking about how there are various different components of infrastructure on the cloud environment that need to be optimized. Again, how is Intel there, or what is Intel's position and place in helping developers really to have the best infrastructure for their workloads and purposes?
Yeah, so that's where we work, and I'll give an example of how the amount of work that we've done with all the hyperscalers out there, right? And they have created specific instances. So as we say, some people will look at cloud as one homogeneous cloud, but really there are many flavors and variations of the physical infrastructure that cloud provider provides. And we work closely with a lot of the hyperscalers, for example, to kind of architect different instances within their cloud that have a physical infrastructure that are designed for different usage models, right? It could be very high compute, very high memory, very high networking throughputs, and so on, right? Or combination of all these three factors, right? So it's always about the compute, the storage, the networking, and the different combinations there to create the different instances that will be suitable for different use cases out there, right? So that's kind of also sometimes the work that we work with customers, right? Like if you want to land on one of the hyperscalers cloud, you can land it generically and you just put it wherever they think it fits. But actually, the smarter way to do is to look at specific instances, right? And how these instances are engineered. Again, like I said, the different instances are engineered for particular use cases, right? And depending on your use case, you want to put it on that specific instance, or you want to spread it across multiple instances because it depends on your workload, right? So that's how we work heavily with the cloud service provider. And if you want to build your own private cloud, again, what is the architecture that you need? So again, we work with our ecosystem, and like, for example, we have a lot of reference architectures, what we call reference architectures, right? And that's where our customers can use those reference architecture as a starting point to understand what kind of infrastructure you need if you're using Ansible or you're using OpenShift or and different type of applications, right? And that's kind of the starting point, and then you build from there and customize it for yourself.
Fantastic. Okay, I'd like to sort of change gears now a little bit and move to our next section. So we've made the case for the need for infrastructure automation, the need for agile infrastructure. I want to now look at maintaining that agility for your infrastructure. And perhaps maybe, Ben, we can come back to you. What do you think are the key challenges that financial institutions currently face in terms of just maintaining their automated infrastructure and the logging, the monitoring, the assessing of it as the tool chain becomes ever more complex?
Yeah, I'll keep this answer short because I think I'd really want to hear from Krista on this, because she's in that space where she's really actually applying this as opposed to me as a vendor pontificating about it. But I'll just put a few words around this. It's something I mentioned earlier before, technical debt. It can't be overestimated. And to use a banking analogy, if you don't pay down the debt, then that incurs interest, and then interest upon interest then really gets you into a lot of trouble. And I think the thing that's, this pleasure and pain, this contention that's going on in the world of, agile infrastructure and open source and multi-cloud, hybrid cloud stuff, is there's so many different tools and a plethora of different technologies that can be used. And they do one thing very, very well at a point in time, but they don't live in a silo. There's a multiplicity of these layers of architectures and interoperability requirements and systems integration testing, which everyone knows is the bane of everyone's existence. That is where it really, causes things to break down, along with compliance and financial services. That when you kind of need to have this very focused philosophy of, I need to automate, have a ruthless level of automate everything. And if I can get an API and if I can cut code to orchestrate it and then have rinse and repeat, then I'm on my journey to becoming very resilient and agile. And I think when we speaking with Krista earlier this week and just doing some prep work on this, I think Krista and what she's doing in ADB is a beautiful example, a very good example of how they've built in that level of automation as a culture in her group, and then some of the efficiencies they've gained from things like 16 hours down to 2 hours for patching, those sorts of things, and laying it up to be able to go into a public cloud and take the lessons that they've learned to be able to get there. Now that, by virtue, is bringing in a level of resiliency and adaptability and time to onboard that typically would have taken a lot longer, because you don't have the levels of automation and secure push button automation in your on-premise that you can then sort of start to transpose that into a public cloud. So, yes. Sorry, Krista, I hope I didn't sort of steal too much of your thunder there, but I thought it's just such a really great entree to Joe's question.
So, Krista, over to you. Yes, we'd love to hear your experiences.
I guess so. For us, like the biggest thing is having those principles, as I said earlier. It's really making sure that we write the modules in such a way that they can be reused. What we hate is to have written 3 different playbooks and then doing one thing, albeit slightly differently. That means that we've basically just moved the work from doing the manual work instead to writing the scripts differently. So there was a big push that we want to make it as reusable, as modular as possible, so that it's like building Legos, right? We want to build the Lego blocks, and then for somebody to orchestrate and add the Lego blocks themselves to achieve whatever the automation use case is. There's, I guess the biggest challenge probably, and this is not only probably on financial industry, but whenever you do things like automation, would be there's sort of some hesitance from people to adapt, right? There's going to be people resisting the change, thinking that, hey, what's going to happen to my job? You're trying to automate me out of my job. What people don't realize is that automation gives autonomy to the staff or to the people to do things that are of higher value. And I think once we've shown that, you know what, we're not asking you to do one thing 1,000 times. We're asking you to write the script that you write once and run 1,000 times over the year. I think that's probably the once you've explained that to the users or to the to the admins, there's a lot of enthusiasm to adapt these things, because A, they're gaining a higher value skill. B, there's clear it's the, how do I say this, by codifying or putting into code your infrastructure, you have the latest source of documentation of what your infrastructure looks like, and it's audited, and you can roll back to a previous good configuration at any point in time. So I think there's just explaining that to the admins, because traditionally admins would hate anything that development work is needed, right? So suddenly you have to explain things like Git branching, or let's write a a pipeline to that, or suddenly please translate your current state of infrastructure into something that can be version controlled, into code, something that we can run over and over and over again. But once you get that hump and you actually get the buy-in, then it's actually addicting. Just want to add that, you know, ADB has, at least for us, we've not only adapted these principles on building infrastructure as code, we've even done it on data transformation. So things like running those Python scripts to transform your data and then push that to, you know, your traditional ETL tools and push that into the data warehouse. We've also applied these principles because we are seeing the benefits of having something that you can repeat, something that is consistent, and something that is, how do I say this, reliable. I think, I don't know if I said it a while ago, but people always equate automation to be something for effectivity or effectiveness. Like, I'm going to save X amount of hours. Yes, that is a byproduct of that. But for ADB, it's more of a resilient tactic, because suddenly we can run this across, at any point in time, across any environment to a different, you know, a cloud provider, and so on and so forth. So if you want to, and, you know, we were asked to do this because of the pandemic, right? ADB probably issued a record, you know, amount of disbursement last year, and half of that was COVID response. So we are asked to be resilient, innovative, and secure all at the same time. And in traditional world, that would mean that each of them would be counterbalancing each other, right? Traditionally, you would have something more resilient, but then it's not going to be, if you want resilient and secure, it's not going to be innovative. But if you want innovative, usually at this, you're going to sacrifice security. Only by automation you can achieve like the golden, you know, the holy grail of all this tree. And I think that's something that ADB is, how do I say this, culturally embracing. Like, we know that it's going to be automate if we want to keep at this pace.
Yeah, and Krista, staying with you then. So you mentioned this sort of holy trinity, that's the holy grail. So in terms of you know, enhancing the reduction of lead times, maintaining quality of service, staying secure, what metrics has ADB been using in terms of, and I say quantitative and qualitative metrics, in terms of being able to monitor and to make sure that you guys remain agile in this way?
That's a very good question. So on our end, we are, you know, we are Datadog lovers. So basically, we monitor every single thing of the infrastructure through Datadog. And what I love about this is because our automation playbooks are so integratable, or integration ready, or API first. Then basically from our monitoring platforms, we can actually trigger what do you call this, whatever playbooks that we want to do. So not only do we achieve the resiliency, like we know that at any point in time we can spin up new servers or restart them as needed, and so on and so forth. We have that visibility, and we can actually do something about it. We can act on it. We can proactively do something, because all of these playbooks can be triggered with what do you call this, with a simple API call.
Fantastic. And Ben, maybe coming back to you, maybe let's have a look at sort of from the DevSecOps angle, look at security, orchestrating infrastructure security in particular, to ensure sort of compliance and an audit trail. Of course, you know, we know there's been an explosion of security scripts and tools that have you know, appeared on the market. So bearing all that in mind, what do you feel are some of the challenges that some of these FIs are facing from a DevSecOps angle?
I mean, how long's a piece of string, really? You know, it's a bit like death and taxes. They're always going to be around. With banks and highly regulated industries, it's a case of, you know, are they going to get more regulation or less regulation? Well, we know the answer to that. In a world of, you know, becoming digitally native, you know, digital first for financial institutions, you know, security and compliance, governance, those sorts of things is, you know, now pretty much a major subcommittee on every board that I'm seeing across, Southeast Asia. And I suspect maybe ADB is no different to that. Also, given the fact that it's a more sort of public UN-facing institution, so it's even got more sort of regulatory oversight. That sort of brings in this newer, I guess, culture or model or sector, if you will, or sub-market in the security space of security orchestration, automation, and response. So how do you orchestrate and automate the security compliance across a plethora of tools that a financial institution has, do that in an automated way that's compliant and has a level of resiliency and adaptability and agile, so that you aren't constrained, because regulation constrains things. Let's be honest about it. So the idea of a financial institution is to get money out for clients, get money in from clients, and then be very, very risk adverse and smart with it. When there's more regulation, particularly where you've got hybrid clouds, data governance, those sorts of things, business continuity planning, support, response times, those sorts of things. And then if you have an outage, you have to then report back to the regulatory authority and explain what went on. These things are just, they're never going to go away. They're only going to get more cumbersome, if you will. And so that's where security automation and tying all the different security tools that do one thing very well within an architecture, is really an essential part to that. I'm not sure if Krista can talk much about what they're doing there, but they were, Krista was talking earlier this week about, being able to integrate, other tools into their existing playbooks, because it's an API, and that then just enhances and extends the level of compliance and automation that they have with a security focus, and then the idea of pushing it more to the left as their environments are.
Thank you, Ben. And yes, Krista, would you be able to talk to that then, about how you've been integrating this into your playbooks?
Yeah, so basically, when we started the playbooks, we had one which does server patching. So we had to integrate with our Windows and Linux hosts and trigger the patches either ad hoc or on schedule, and so on and so forth, right? So we've built that integration from Ansible to do to make sure that we can patch our servers monthly or whatever time that we want to do. And it's kind of amusing or amazing when we had our team meetings, and I've heard from our security operations master, where basically they have a project that uses SOAR, right? So security, orchestration, automation, and response. And basically they wanted to, if they find some vulnerability, apply those patches to the server that are vulnerable. So given that the way that we've divided or created our modules, we are actually able to reuse the same patching modules, but instead kind of like tokenize some of the things, like for example, certain CVEs and certain hosts that the SOAR platform wants to, apply those patches to. So as Ben said, SOAR is doing one thing and one thing very well, which is, finding out the issues or the vulnerabilities on our hosts. But then it's leveraging on Ansible to do and run the patches and apply the patches to those servers. I think one thing that we get from this is we didn't need to re-engineer any integration from our SOAR platform into the patching servers, or at least the patching lifecycle and so on and so forth. And at the same time, without even trying, because of the way that we've built our modules, we've actually found a mechanism to be able to reuse already to a different use case. So it's not only, making sure that we are effectively doing one thing, it's actually giving us other capabilities that we are finding out as we go and have other initiatives within the bank.
Yes, thank you very much, Krista. So within the interest of time, because we only have a few more minutes till the end of the webinar, I'd like to now move on to the last section, which is really about the future. It's a call to action, a sort of what next. And I'm going to sort of open this up to everyone, but Chris, maybe start with you perhaps, and maybe what you're seeing with your clients. How do you think that automation generally should be applied, not just as a tool, but how it could be a culture, a practice, something that's institutionalized across the financial institution? Chris, are you seeing this with your customers?
Sorry, is there a question for me? Yeah.
Oh, yes. So, Chris, sorry. I just wanted to see with your customers, are you seeing automation now being institutionalized across the financial institutions?
Well, again, like I said, I don't have a full view of all financial institutions, but in general, I mean, what we are hearing, at least from our OEMs, is that the physical infrastructure automation, which has existed for quite a while, would have to see more integration into the application management automation, right? And that's happening, already. But I think that's going to be very much more that we will try and do, from exposing the infrastructure into the higher level stacks of the software, right? So that, as I said, examples are like all this telemetry. We're just really at the beginning of this, right? But we are learning a lot from the hyperscaler cloud providers, right? They have, I guess because of the scale in which they operate, across the world, and the volumes of data that they handle. We're learning also from them about how much you can automate, and how far you can push the envelope on that side, right? And most of them have already demonstrated over the years the art of doing it. I wouldn't say that there's a science behind it, but really the art of doing it, right? And how to do it well from an operational point of view, but also from a business point of view, right? How they have managed to squeeze every little bit of efficiency out of that. And really, at the end of the day, it is really having mastery over your entire infrastructure, right? Both physical as well as on the software side. And I see that happening more and more, right? And a lot of what we are doing today is again what we've learned from all these hyperscalers, right? And the agility, or I would say the elasticity that they talk about, right? They were the first actually to go into that, and it's going to get better, right? And as platform developers, or the physical infrastructure developers at Intel, we are focused on looking at where how we build that infrastructure, right? Today, the hyperscalers, they're already talking. I mean, what we have brought, what today in enterprise that they've experienced, what they call software-defined data centers or software-defined infrastructure. Again, that is a product of the work that a lot of these hyperscalers have done, right? And we are also working and now already have got platforms with them where they are disaggregating the compute, the storage, and the network. That's probably not something that most enterprises would use right now. But I foresee that will become more and more a reality for even enterprise users, right? How you look at all these three pieces of infrastructure separately, or maybe independently, but still working together, right? But being able to manage it differently. And to be able to do that, you really need very sophisticated automation tools, right? That takes care of a lot of the plumbing on the back end for you, and you have a high level view of your entire operations from how we say from a use case perspective, right? Rather than worrying about what connects to what on the back end.
Yeah, Chris, I think that's an excellent point. I think having those automation tools, the plumbing there in place, and then having that sort of visualization on what's happening is going to be key here. Ben, perhaps if we can bring you back in as well to this, what do you see in terms of institutionalizing automation? What do you see as how firms can make this as a sort of a culture, as a practice?
Yeah. I think it's a very, very relevant question right now that's going on, that we're seeing across financial institutions in Southeast Asia, which I'm responsible for. And I think ADB, again, is just a really good example of, they've started that journey in April last year, and they've already got some profound results, and will set themselves up for some further, ability to go into hybrid cloud, in a much more faster way. I think the practical thing I'd say to the audience, Joe, is, at least from what could be a practical call to action, Red Hat has what we call a push button security automation solution practice that uses Ansible as the main tool, but then applies that to an organization's team to start engendering automation as a culture, but with a compliance and security focus. So if you're, if the audience is interested to learn more, please reach out to Red Hat. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a follow-up email to the audience, and inquire as to us to come and have a discussion with you about what that automation adoption program is, how it works, what it looks like. We've had some great stories, obviously with ADB being one of them, but another bank, as ANZ down in New Zealand, they spoke at our Red Hat Summit last year about automating, particularly starting at the network space, and then writing these scripts to provision ports whether in the infrastructure be compliant, and they reduced that from weeks down to minutes. And that was just their first use case that they used, but using Red Hat's automation adoption sort of model and building security into it. So come and talk to us, Red Hat, and we can at least brief you on how we think about it, how we approach it, and work with you to apply it to get you on your journey of automation as a culture.
Fantastic, Ben. And just before we close off, Krista, I'd like to just hear from you in terms of ADB's experience in sort of institutionalizing automation.
Okay. So I hate to sound cliche, but unfortunately it's going to be. It's focusing on three things, right? It's always people, process, and technology. So I'm going to go with the easiest first, which is technology. Find something, for us, it was Ansible. Find something that's already is mainstreamed in the industry. So there's a lot of support, a lot of innovation coming also from what you call this, different parts of the community. Like, for example, we don't have to write the Python scripts to integrate to our monitoring tool or to our network tool, because somebody already built it for us. Because a lot of people, there's a lot of following in Ansible. So all of these things, we're able to leverage what others have already done. So I think that's one big thing wherein we are able to scale easily and integrate to multiple things, because we have a lot of those foundations already built by other people. So lean on the engineering done by others. You don't need to re-engineer everything. Also on technology, to do something like infrastructure as code, you must understand certain principles such as idempotency and immutable infrastructure. And I think that's very, very important, because it's such a big jump from how we do infrastructure right now. But once you've mastered what it means to be idempotent or to be immutable, then I think it's easy. It's always easy to replicate and to master automation. At least that's in our case. For process, I would say that it's finding out because there's a lot of business processes that you have within IT only. Find out which are those that are high impact and low effort kind of thing. So find that sweet spot and focus on that first, because that's going to bring you the fastest results possible. And for people, I think one of the biggest scare in creating this automation culture is that they think that we need to find these tech unicorns, or those Batmans or superheroes that knows everything, right? You don't need to do that. What you need to do is to spend time and work with your experts, because you know, these hybrids, these unicorns probably is not as domain expert on network. They would know infrastructure, they would know development, but probably doesn't have the same amount of domain knowledge as your existing experts. So instead, take the time and you know, preach and do the evangelism and teach whatever is needed, like, you know, how to write in YAML, or even be comfortable in reading Python in the event that they have to do so, so that they would gain the skills themselves. So we don't need you know, tech unicorns here to build this team. Everybody can do it. It's just starting that jump. And I think if everybody can help make that transition, then you know, everybody would be automation ninjas within the division infrastructure. That helps.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Krista. And we're out of time. So I just would like to thank all the panelists today for the insightful conversation, and to pass it back to Zenon, who will do the outros.
Great, thank you, Joe, and thank you as well to all the panelists. I think this has been a great conversation. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We have received some questions in the background, and as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll get back to you offline about those questions. We'll also share a copy of the recording of this webinar within the next couple of days. So if you want to go back and revisit, or for anybody who didn't watch it, you'll be able to register and watch the recording as well. I might also mention that Capron Asia will be working with Red Hat on a white paper covering many of the topics that we discussed during the webinar today. We'll make sure that that information is shared to you when that paper is published, probably in about a month. As well, please do sign up for our newsletter, and you can keep abreast of all of the coverage that we have of this. So thank you again to Christopher, Benjamin, and Krista, and Joe for the excellent moderation today. This has been a great webinar. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you on a webinar again in the future.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Paul.